What's going on, everybody? This is Dylan with Dylan Talks Tone. Today we are going to talk about Mexico Teles, made in Mexico Teles. We did the American ones, we did the Strats. Now we're going to talk about Mexico Teles. Which one should you buy? Which one might be the best for you? I'm going to tell you which one I think is the best for me. And we're going to talk about mods. Which ones might need to be modded, which ones are okay, which ones are hard to mod, easy to mod, all that. Let's get into it. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk about the Deluxe series. We're going to jump straight into this because there's a lot of guitar models. So we're going to jump into the Deluxe series. This is kind of, well, it's Deluxe. So there's two models, and first we're going to talk about the Nashville. Alder body, poly finish. All these guitars are going to have poly finish, except for a couple of them. We'll talk about that. All of these guitars pretty much are going to have Peo Ferro fretboards or maple fretboards. We're out of rosewood land in the made in Mexico stuff for the most part. This particular guitar is special because it's a Nashville, so it has vintage noiseless pickups. So it's got a Strat pickup and a Tele pickup. So there's your neck in your middle position, Tele Strat. And then it's going to have the vintage noiseless bridge pickup in it as well. Sealed locking tuners, which is pretty cool. Now these are the modern style tuners, so they're going to be 10mm if you ever wanted to mod them. I don't know why you would, because they're pretty cool. 5-way switch, kind of like a Strat. Now the one thing to note on this guitar is it's got a modern bridge with the 6 steel blocks, so it's great for intonation and setup. But if you wanted brass saddles for some reason, if you wanted to switch to that, this guitar might be a little harder because of that modern style bridge. Is a little more difficult to find replacement parts for. Just want to mention that. Now let's talk about the neck. Peo Ferro fretboard, like we said, a modern C, 12-inch radius. So this is a very modern kind of flatter. I like 12-inch radius. I think it's a pretty good, I think it's an easy guitar to play, if that makes sense. Synthetic bone nut. All of these guitars are going to have synthetic bone nuts. This has a 22 fret fretboard. I asked this question last week. For those of you that don't like 22 fret fretboards, I don't know why. It's just a curiosity to me. Put it in the comments and let me know why you don't like a 22 fret fretboard, because I've seen a lot of objection to that, if that makes sense. 42mm nut. That's going to be a theme also. And then the narrow, tall frets. So this guitar, there's nothing to, I don't want to say there's nothing to write home about. I want to say that this is a great guitar as it is. I don't think you would need to touch anything on it. The only thing I would worry about is if you want to change out those saddles. The other thing is if you don't like noiseless pickups, then call me. Obviously I have a thing for it. But the biggest thing is there are other choices if you don't like noiseless pickups. Now let's talk about the Deluxe thin line. This is an alder body, still got vintage noiseless pickups. This has a 4-way switch in it, so it has the series, so it makes it sound kind of like a humbucker when you put it in one of those series positions. Still modern bridge. Modern tuners. This one is a little different. It's got a satin neck, satin feel on the back of the neck, which is pretty cool. And it's a C shape as opposed to a modern C. Again, for most people aren't going to be able to tell much of a difference between those two fretboard, or those two shapes, but I just wanted to mention it. Other than that, this guitar is fairly similar, except that it only has 2 pickups, obviously. That modern bridge and those noiseless pickups, those might be 2 features that you either get this guitar for those features, or you have to take that into consideration if you want to mod it. Just want to mention that. All right, let's talk about the Noventa. You're right, I'm an idiot, and I was not thinking about the fact that Noventa means 90 in Spanish, so all the P90 guitars are called Noventa. It's pretty cool. Alder body, single P90, volume tone, super simple. This guitar is, to me, unbelievable. I would love to buy one of these and then put my own P90 in it, obviously, but this is a really, really cool guitar. I really, really like it. It's got that shorty vintage saddle bridge. It kind of just gives you that Fender version of a Les Paul Jr., sort of sweet. Obviously, it's a 25.5-inch scale, so it's not going to sound the same as a Junior, obviously, but very, very cool. Fender's version of it. 60s C fretboard, which is our neck profile, which is a little bit different. Also going to have a 21 fret fretboard. So back to a vintage style fretboard, 9.5-inch radius, medium jumbo frets, and a 42 millimeter 1.650 nut. Again, the neck is just middle of the road, nothing special about it. It's going to be awesome. Medium jumbo frets, in my opinion, are the jam. This thing, 9.5-inch radius fretboard too, is pretty cool. This guitar is just going to be, it's going to be a rocker. It's going to be a rocker. I dig it. Oh, one other thing about this guitar too is it does have the vintage style tuners with the safety posts with the hole in the top. These are like my favorite style tuners actually, because it's super easy and fast to change strings. And when you go to replace those, if you want to upgrade them, they are the smaller holes. So modern tuners are 10 millimeters. Vintage style holes are 11/32. So on the Noventa, it's a vintage style tuner if you ever want to replace them or upgrade them. Okay, so let's talk about the Vintera series. Now, this is a very cool series, made in Mexico, but I really like this series, and I'll tell you why. If you go back to our American video, you'll hear me kind of complaining about the neck profile on the American original, and how this guitar, that the American original, is supposed to be super vintage spec, and it's just not, in my opinion, and by some of the facts there. So I think this series here, even though it's made in Mexico, I think this is one to look at for sure, especially if you're a vintagey guy who might not want to spend custom shop prices. This is the jam, in my opinion. So let's talk about the 50s spec version of this guitar, the Vintera 50s, alder body, poly finish, so that's not vintage correct. However, the road worn version of this guitar is a nitro finish, so if you want to deal with some relicking, you've got a nitro finish. 50s style single coils, 3 brass saddles. You notice they're not compensated, but that's okay because in the 50s they weren't. It's got the vintage style tuners, just like the Noventa, the smaller 11/32 safety post sort of deals, kind of like a vintage single line or double line tuner, but probably Fender's kind of cheaper version for the Mexico stuff. 7.25-inch radius fretboard, like it's supposed to have in the 50s. The American original does not have that. Vintage tall frets, 1.650 fret nut width, and 42 millimeter. So I think they're just really going with this. That's a little bit wider than vintage, but it's going to be a great guitar to play because of that. The 50s U-shaped neck, fatter, flatter shoulders. It's going to fill up the hand pretty nice, pretty sick. 21 fret fretboard. You know, it's got a single ply pick guard on it. So this is very 50s vintagey spec sort of thing. And it's really, I think, this is the most quote unquote vintage correct Tele that you can get right now, outside of custom shop stuff. So for under $1,000, it's pretty cool. Let's talk about the 60s. 60 is going to be alder body, poly finish, same thing. You can still get it in the road worn one if you want a nitro finish, which is pretty cool. 60s hot Tele. So this is like some modified, it's a little bit hotter than the normal 60s pickups. 4-way switch because it's the modified version. 3 brass saddles, same kind of deal. 60s C profile, my favorite neck in the Fender lineup. Pale Ferro fretboard. I really like Pale Ferro. I know a lot of people make noise about it, but that's just because it's not rosewood. It feels fine. It looks fine. You might want to pick one in person because sometimes the color can be a little interesting. Just, you know, go pick one. But yeah, 9.5-inch radius fretboard, which this probably should be 7.25, but we won't quibble about that. 21 fret fretboard, 1.650. Now this one has jumbo frets on it. This to me is the guitar to own right here. This is the Mexico guitar to own, in my opinion, because I'm a 60s Tele fan. I know not everybody is, but I really, really like this. Let's talk about the other 60s Tele with the Bigsby on it, which is pretty interesting. This has a 6 saddle bridge because it has the Bigsby. So, you know, you gotta, that's a whole different setup. It's alder body poly finish, same stuff. This has more vintage style pickups, a little bit lower output. It has a Bigsby B50 on it. So the B50 is the import version. It's not the B5, but it should be fine as long as the setup is correct. We have a bunch of videos about this. If you have any questions about that, let me know. Now this is also more a 60s-ish neck because it's got a 7.25-inch radius and vintage tall frets. It's still the 60s C profile. It's still 21 frets. It's still the 1.650 fretboard. But when you go to the Bigsby guitar, you get that 7.25 radius and you get a little lower output pickups. So basically the same guitar, but just with a Bigsby and a different radius on the fretboard. Pretty cool. Now the 70s version of the Vintera is basically going to be like your 70s Deluxe, right? So it's got the fat peg head on it, like it's supposed to have. Now these are not Tim Shaw proper Cunif humbuckers in this guitar. So these are your normal, kind of your Mexico reissue. They're basically a regular humbucker in a wide range suit. We have a video about this. I work on them all the time. They're not proper, but they do sound good. They do sound good. You just have to know that, because if you're going to upgrade these pickups, they are not cheap to upgrade. I don't make a direct drop-in replacement for this. Lawler does, and it's expensive, but it's really good. It's my favorite wide range reproduction is the Lawler ones. Definitely my favorite. So, but if you're gonna upgrade this, that's the one thing you need to know is those pickups are not cheap to upgrade. It has the F-stamp tuners, so they are not the vintage style ones, which I think goes to the 10mm shaft too. This is the 3-bolt neck with the micro tilt. We talked about the micro tilt being super cool on a couple of guitars last week. I love that micro tilt thing. I know a lot of people don't like it, but putting 2 degrees of neck angle into a Tele really makes it play nice, and I really dig that. 9.5-inch radius fretboard, medium jumbo frets. This has the 1.650 nut, thin C, basically the same thing. Now the custom version of this guitar that only has one humbucker and then the single coil is basically the same guitar, but it actually has a 7.25 radius. So you've got these two 70s guitars, one with 2 humbuckers and a 9.5-inch radius, one humbucker, which is obviously the custom, with a 7.25 radius. So just FYI, you're gonna change neck fretboard radiuses 1 to 2 pickups there. So just FYI on that. This Vintera series is the jam. In my opinion, these are really good guitars. And of course, I'm gonna tell you to upgrade the pickups, but they're really good guitars if you can find them, because I've been looking. It's kind of tough. Okay, so here let's talk about the Player Series. So the Player Series to me is a little bit of a mixed bag, and we'll get into why in just a second. The bodies are basically all the same, okay? So alder, polyfinish, it's pretty much all the same stuff. This guitar is available in a 2 humbucker version and also a single coil version. Now what's interesting about it is it has Alnico 5 single coils and it has Alnico 2 humbuckers in the humbucker version. 10mm tuners, so it's got the normal modern tuners that probably will need to be upgraded at some point. They're not amazing, but they work. They're pretty good. As far as the electronics go, these are the guitars that we get the most calls about. I bought a Player Series. I really don't like the pickups. They're a little flat. They don't have much clarity on the top end. They don't really work well. They don't interact with an amp as well. So this might be the series where you go and you upgrade and you put a set of our flat 6s in it, or you put a set of DAFs, or you put a set of our center punch and our 8-ball or whatever, or any other pickups that you buy from anywhere. It doesn't matter, but chances are you're going to want to do a little work with these. Maybe change the pots. There's some. This is a fun guitar to upgrade. The neck is a modern C, which is a great neck profile, 9.5-inch radius. It has a satin back finish on it. I love that. Same 1.650 nut, medium jumbo. So it's the same basic neck as all of the other 9.5-inch radius fretboards. I don't know if you noticed that, but most of these necks, except for the 50s one, are pretty much all the same, just depending on the fretboard radius. So very similar across the line. There's little differences, but they're very similar, and most people can pick any made in Mexico guitar except for that 50s one and feel pretty good on the neck profile. That 50s one is its own world with that U. The only other thing that's kind of a trick about this guitar is it does have the regular one, just the regular Player Series Tele, has 6-saddle bridge, the modern 6-saddle bridge with the 3 bolts. So again, if you're going to upgrade that, you're going to probably have to do some shopping to make sure you get the right thing, obviously. Okay, so the Player Series is the one that I'm least excited about. But let's talk about, now that we've kind of gone through all the guitars, and we're going to bring the American ones into this a little bit as well. Which guitar would I buy if I'm going to, and I am shopping for a Tele right now. I'm actually shopping for a new Tele. I sold my Shoreline Gold Tele and it's being shipped probably Monday. So I am really, actually, you're watching this video Monday, so I'm shipping it today. I'm really stoked on these new Teles. My choice would either be probably the 60s Vintera, and then I would probably say the American Performer. What's really funny about those two guitars is they're really only 150 bucks apart or something. They're not that much apart. And they're also spec'd very similarly. And since I'm gonna upgrade the pickups in anything I buy because I'm a pickup guy, I don't care about that part. And I like both the specs on both those guitars. And I think within 150 bucks of each other, the American Performer versus the Vintera 60s is gonna be my personal choice. If you are new to Teles and you just want a middle of the road, I just want to play a Tele, I've never had one before, I would say the same thing. I would say buy that Vintera 60s Tele. If you're a peghead snob and you have to have American made for some reason, you know, United States made, then buy the Player. But for the savings, and honestly, the CNC programs are the same, the quality control processes are the same, the plants are just a few miles apart. That made in Mexico Vintera 60s guitar is really a good guitar. That's what I would take from all of this. And then if you want to get specific with various specs, then you just start plodding through the terrible Fender website and say, okay, I want this neck radius and I want this and this. And I think we've pretty much laid that out. I will say that there are some other series. We didn't get into any of the special stuff or any of the artist stuff, but look through that stuff too if you want something very specific. Let me know what Tele you're playing. Put it in the comments below. And let me know, of these guitars that we just talked about, which one would you buy? And would you spring for the American Performer over the Vintera 60s? Or what? What would you do? Let me know. Thanks for hanging out. My name is Dylan. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the join button down there if you are so inclined, as well as our Patreon link that is below. I appreciate you watching all these videos, and we will see you in the next one.